Number 5 is obviously biological destruction, right? And this is obviously a technique of genocide. And it's important to, I'm going to make a distinction between biological and, I think it's coming up next, physical. Yeah, physical and biological are different, right? And I'll explain the difference between biological and physical. In biological technique, the policy is one of depopulation, right? So there is a policy of depopulation. This is going to, you'll see acts of euthanasia, you'll see acts of abortion, you'll see acts of forced sterilization, right? Enforced sterilization. All of these things would go in biological techniques. Euthanasia, abortion, enforced sterilization, all of these things sort of are categorized in this idea of biological. It's also going to be simultaneously within the oppressors group, just the reverse. An increase in birth, right? An increase in fertility, an increase in the birth rate, right? So the oppressed group, we want their birth rate to decline. The oppressors group, we want the birth rate to increase. And biology and this biological technique speaks to that, right? It speaks to policy of depopulation and manipulation, we'll say, of birth rate. So obviously, the birth rate of the targeted group, we want that to go down. The birth rate of the protected group, we want that to go up. And that is basically what the biological aspect refers to. Number 6 is physical. Number 6 is physical. And physical destruction is destruction, right? It's the actual extermination of human lives. So anytime we're talking about physical, it's different from biological, because in physical technique of genocide, we're talking about the actual extermination of human lives, right? And he talks about 3 forms of extermination. The first form that he talks about is racial discrimination with respect to feeding, right? So if we have a centralized government, and that government appropriates the Soviet Union notoriously, right? But many other governments. If we have a centralized government, and that government is in control of the appropriation of food, right? Then all that needs to happen is that the government needs to say, let's say there's people that live here on the outskirts, and these are the ones that we want to target. All the food is housed here, and I also have the means of sending the food to the people. Then all I do is I just keep my silos filled, and I never send that food back out. What's going to end up happening is that all these people are going to die of starvation, and that destruction, that extermination, that physical destruction of those human beings is a result of denying them adequate nourishment, adequate food, right? That's one of the forms of physical destruction. He labels it, he being Lemkin, labels it racial discrimination in feeding. And that's what he means. So by racial discrimination of feeding, government is centralized, food appropriation, distribution is controlled by centralized government. Obviously the roads and the means of getting the food to the people is also controlled by a centralized government. Centralized government makes the decision that we're not going to feed the people anymore based on some racial identity. We stop sending the food to the people have nothing to do but die. Okay. The second is endangering health. Endangering health. With respect to endangering health, it might be something like we know that there are incidents of something that can be cured, and we don't send out shipments of some vaccine to targeted members of the population. It might be that we know that the water supply is dirty and we don't do anything to clean it, right? You can commit an act of genocide wherein you have the ability to protect or to help or to safeguard the lives of the population, but you choose not to do anything. It's not always proactive, right? People think, you know, there is no sort of, I hate to use the word passive, but you can just neglect a population and that can be an act of genocide, right? So endangering health is typically this sort of neglected population, right? The public health concerns of the population are not addressed by the genocidal state. You can have sort of proactive attempts to specifically make a population sick, right? You can go out and contaminate their water supply deliberately knowing that it's going to kill the population, right? That would obviously be an act of physical destruction, but it's less likely than assisting in public health concerns, right? Preventing, and actually this would be preventative, right? Preventative concerns. Right. So we're talking about preventative concerns. And we don't allow these things to be prevented. We let them occur knowing that they're going to exterminate their occurrence will result in the extermination of a large percentage of the population.